Well, it's our annual meeting with Tom Fisher from Timber Press, and he always has such interesting books for us for the holiday season, for gifts giving, and for gardening. So Tom, thanks so much for coming, and you always have a nice selection, so I love the idea of the first one.
Thanks. This is a great book for the beginning gardener. The new Gardeners Handbook, Grow a Beautiful and Bountiful Garden. The author, Darryl Byers, is on the staff of the New York Botanic Garden, and he teaches classes there, so he knows exactly what it is that new gardeners need to know. And all the basics are here, from soil preparation and site selection to the tools you need, basic information on just easy propagation, like starting plants from cuttings or dividing them and starting seeds, how to choose plants, what the best plants are going to be for the conditions you have in your yard, whether you've got sun or shade or good drainage or not so good drainage. And it's all illustrated both with really good, sharp illustrations and photographs. I mean, these are real life situations. It's not just fantasy. And it's the kinds of situations and conditions that real gardeners encounter in their yards. So if you don't have a clue about how to get started and you really want to garden, it's all in there, and it includes both ornamentals and vegetable gardens.
You know, that's so great, and especially this year. There's so many new gardeners out there, and they need as much help. And as far as our veterans too, I mean, we always need tips and tricks.
Yeah, it's always good to be reminded of the basics.
Definitely. And man, the second one, been waiting for this new book
So
to come
this is great, yes. Windcliff, A Story of People, Plants, and Gardens, is the story of Dan Hinckley's wonderful garden at Windcliff. Now, Dan is a really beloved figure here in the Pacific Northwest. He was the creator of Heronswood Nursery up in Washington, which for many years was like the destination for fanatic gardeners. I mean, Dan's a plant collector. He spent decades scouring the world for new interesting garden plants and bringing them back and testing them and seeing how they can work in our gardens. And so Heronswood closed a few years ago, but then it reopened. Dan is now at the helm again, hosting it as a public garden. But this is really about the creation of his personal garden, Windcliff, which is on a beautiful site on bluffs overlooking Puget Sound and has a view of Mount Rainier and the Seattle skyline in the background. But Dan has created this very personal, beautiful garden with all the plants that he has collected over the decades. And it goes through every part of the garden, showing you what he's planted, what his goals were, and how it's all worked out. And the photography is by a young Australian photographer named Claire Takash, who's really one of the greatest garden photographers working right now. So it's gorgeous photography. The writing is in Dan's typical warm, humorous, inviting manner. It's just a delightful book to read. And really, and it's a book, actually the garden is open to the public a few times a year. So if you're in the area, you can go online and find out when it's going to be open and plan your visit. But in the meantime, you can read about it in this wonderful book with its gorgeous photos and really delightful story.
And I think this next one too is another one to be inspiring for us for next year.
Yes, Greg Lode's, who is a British author, The Modern Cottage Garden. People love the cottage garden. They love the fact that it's bountiful, it's full of floral color most months of the year. It's got that lovely, soft, welcoming feeling that people like so much. The thing is, there are other garden currents going right now, and what Greg does in this book is to blend the feel and the look of the traditional cottage garden with the exciting developments of the new perennial movement that people like Pete Audolph have pioneered. And so Greg takes the best elements from both these garden styles and blends them together and shows you how you can achieve a look that's both modern and traditional at the same time, just the best elements of both. Both in terms of plant choice and in terms of the way it looks. And it's actually an excellent book for people with small gardens or even just a balcony, because he talks a lot about containers and combining plants in containers to create a really lush garden-like look. So if you've got a small property and you just want to experiment a little bit in a traditional yard, there's really lots of information in there, including the 50 best plants for achieving the cottage garden look, as well as really good practical information.
Wow, so really something for all kinds of gardeners there.
Exactly.
Nice. And this one's kind of interesting, kind of a change up.
It is. Paige Dickey is really one of our best garden writers. She became famous for her garden called Duck Hill, which was in northern Westchester County, and she wrote several books about it. She's a wonderful, wonderful garden writer. But she and her husband were getting a little older, and they decided they needed to make a change. So they sold their place in Westchester County and moved to northwestern Connecticut. And actually, the interesting thing is, you think they would have downscaled a little bit. They actually wound up buying a larger property than they used to have. But they're gardening it in a very different way. They're really doing a lot more with wild gardening, with encouraging native plants, and with doing less that's artificial and very labor intensive, and more that's like working with the landscape and the plants that are there in order to create both a beautiful and a wildlife friendly environment. And she's one of the best writers. You can sit down in your armchair and read this, and it's just totally delightful. And I think it really speaks to people who are getting up there and who have been gardening for a while, and looking for different ways to garden as they get a little older. But also, it's just a lovely, lovely read.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
And then I think this one is another good one for us.
Yes, David Culp. David Culp is a gardener just outside of Philadelphia area. He wrote several years ago a book called The Layered Garden, which had lots of exciting gardening ideas in it. This takes that idea a little bit further and talks about the various parts of the garden. And the interesting thing about the book is that he divides it into the gardening year, into 6 seasons rather than 4. He talks about early spring and late spring as being separate seasons, mainly because very different plants grow at those times of year, and also early fall and late fall as we transit into winter. There's not just a lot of good practical garden advice. There's also delightful recipes from that part of Pennsylvania. There's information about how you can create beautiful, simple floral arrangements for your home with what you're growing in your garden, as well as interesting color palettes of plants that are growing at specific times of year, showing how they all work together in terms of color and texture and foliage. So it's just again, it's delightfully written. It's photographed by Rob Cardillo, who's one of the best garden photographers going right now. So both for practical advice and to show how you can just expand your own gardening life into different areas you might not have suspected. It's full of all that kind of information, and just a joy to read.
We're always looking how to add more plants, so I think it tells us how we can do that.
It does indeed.
Lovely. And then for all of us, we haven't been able to travel, so really, this is really going to feed that.
Yes, Adventures in Eden. The author, Carolyn Mullett, leads garden tours of Europe. And this is the fruit of her years of discovering little-known gardens in Europe and beyond. She really takes you on these wonderful, intimate tours of gardens throughout both the United Kingdom and the continent. There are wonderful places like the Jardin Plume in France, Peter Korn's Habitat Garden in Norway, as well as gardens you could encounter in the UK and in Ireland. Helen Dillon's brand new garden outside of Dublin. And they're really lovely little intimate portraits, and it's also supplemented with beautiful photography. And lots of these gardens are open to the public at various times of year, so it's a great opportunity to sit back and plan your next garden tour when we're able to travel again and enjoy these things. But in the meantime, you get to experience it vicariously by reading Carolyn's book.
Oh, and it is a lovely picture book too, lovely photos,
Yes.
and so much great information. So where can we find all these we're going to give them to ourselves as gifts and to our friends
Sure.
and family?
You can go to the Timber Press website, timberpress.com. They're also all available on Amazon right now, and Carolyn's book is probably still available for pre-order right now. It'll be published on December 8th. So yes, there are many outlets where you can find these books.
Tom, thank you so much. We always enjoy meeting with Tom, and there are some really good books that are going to be on your shelf this winter.
My
Thanks
pleasure,
so much.
Judy.
Thank you.